I bet you're wondering what the text on this slide says. And I bet you're wondering why there's so much text on this slide, or why it's so big on this slide. I'm Erica Gonzales, and I'm a graphic design major here at KU. Today, I'm going to talk to you all about how important visuals are and how oftentimes they can get overlooked. More specifically, I'm going to talk about typography and some tips on how to use it for when you're creating your presentation. Like I said, I'm a design major, so I've been immersed in typography throughout my years here at KU. But some of you might be wondering, what exactly is it? Typography is the arrangement and design of a typeface. Us designers use typography to create a mood, establish a brand, or evoke some sort of emotional response. For example, think about Coca-Cola's recognizable font. It's classic and timeless and represents their brand. It also makes us feel a little bit of nostalgia. Similarly, a presenter should use typography to ensure their message is received, loud and clear. It might be tempting to stick with the default options that come with software programs, but playing around with different typefaces and sizes can make all the difference when it comes to creating interest and connection between your content and audience. When you're deciding on what kind of type to use for your presentations, there are three main things you should consider. The first one is to find the right font. Fonts are not to be taken lightly. Don't over-design or use super intricate decorative fonts because this can distract from your message. When choosing a font, consider sticking to classic or sans serif fonts. Some classic fonts that you could use are Helvetica, Gill Sans, Futura, Arial, and Rockwell. Obviously, there's millions to choose from, but those are just some go-to basics that you should consider. Just a second ago, I mentioned sans serif font. This might be a little unfamiliar to some of you, so I'll give you a quick rundown. A sans serif font is a font without a serif, and a serif is a small decorative flourish that's on the end of a stroke of a letter. For example, a serif font is a Times New Roman and is a serif font. Sans serif fonts do not have those details. An example of that would be Arial. They're more clear and less decorative and easier to read. Serif fonts are usually easier to read when it comes to print and for large paragraphs of text or print materials. But presentations will generally be better with a sans serif since you should have limited text and it needs to be legible from far away. Don't get too worried about mixing sans serif and serif up. It's just important to make sure that you have a legible and simple font. My second tip is to choose the right size. Your typography should be legible to everyone in the room, so keep the size of the venue in mind when you're creating the text. Usually any font size less than 24 point is too small to be reasonably read in presentation situations. And for headers, you should always go a little bigger to create some sort of hierarchy. It helps to test your slides in your presentation room because they will appear differently when they are projected on a big screen rather than just your laptop. Lastly, larger text will draw the eye. So if there is something that you think is most important, you might consider making the text larger or bolding it. My last and final tip is to limit the amount of text per slide. I'm sure you guys have heard this one before. Bullet points are usually a go-to that work well. Try to focus on displaying a single message at a time so it's easier to understand. The fewer things to look at, the better. 5 or 6 is your magical number. If there are more than 6 objects or super long sentences, the human brain will take way longer to process it, which basically means viewers will zone out because your presentation takes too much mental energy to process. Also consider using a visual representation like a photo or diagram along with the text. This can help get your message across clearly. Here's an example of a good presentation slide. It has a bigger header which creates hierarchy. The body type isn't too small or too big. These points are concise and short, and there are not too many points on one slide. Although it may seem unnecessary or daunting, typography isn't too hard to figure out, and it's definitely necessary. Just ask yourself, if you were the audience, if you could read what's on the slide and the message was being presented clearly. Being clear and keeping it simple will start you off on the right foot. Then once you get going, you can start playing with color to add some extra emphasis. This is all the advice I have for you about typography and presentations. I hope this helps when you're creating your next presentation.